It is the bounden duty of every man to look his affairs in the face, and to keep an account of his incomings and outgoings in money matters. The exercise of a little simple arithmetic in this way will be found of great value. Prudence requires that we shall pitch our scale of living a degree below our means, rather than up to them. But this can only be done by carrying out faithfully a plan of living by which both ends may be made to meet. John Locke strongly advised this course. "Nothing," said he, "is likelier to keep a man within compass than having constantly before his eyes the state of his affairs in a regular course of account." The Duke of Wellington kept an accurate detailed account of all the moneys received and expended by him. "I make a point," said he to Mr. Gleig, "of paying my own bills, and I advise every one to do the same. Formerly I used to trust a confidential servant to pay them, but I was cured of that folly by receiving one morning, to my great surprise, duns of a year or two's standing. The fellow had speculated with my money, and left my bills unpaid." Talking of debt, his remark was, "It makes a slave of a man." I have often known what it was to be in want of money, but I never got into debt. Washington was as particular as Wellington was, in matters of business detail. And it is a remarkable fact, that he did not disdain to scrutinize the smallest outgoings of his household, determined as he was to live honestly within his means, even while holding the high office of President of the American Union. Admiral Jervis, Earl St. Vincent, has told the story of his early struggles, and, amongst other things, of his determination to keep out of debt. "My father had a very large family," said he, "with limited means. He gave me £20 at starting, and that was all he ever gave me. After I had been a considerable time at the station at sea, I drew for 20 more, but the bill came back protested. I was mortified at this rebuke, and made a promise, which I have ever kept, that I would never draw another bill without a certainty of its being paid. I immediately changed my mode of living, quitted my mess, lived alone, and took up the ship's allowance, which I found quite sufficient. Washed and mended my own clothes. Made a pair of trousers out of the ticking of my bed. And having by these means saved as much money as would redeem my honor, I took up my bill, and from that time to this I have taken care to keep within my means." Jervis for 6 years endured pinching privation, but preserved his integrity, studied his profession with success, and gradually and steadily rose by merit and bravery to the highest rank. Mr. Hume hit the mark when he once stated in the House of Commons, though his words were followed by laughter, that the tone of living in England is altogether too high. Middle-class people are too apt to live up to their incomes, if not beyond them, affecting a degree of style which is most unhealthy in its effects upon society at large. There is an ambition to bring up boys as gentlemen, or rather genteel men, though the result frequently is, only to make them gents. They acquire a taste for dress, style, luxuries, and amusements, which can never form any solid foundation for manly or gentlemanly character. And the result is, that we have a vast number of gingerbread young gentry thrown upon the world, who remind one of the abandoned hulls sometimes picked up at sea, with only a monkey on board. There is a dreadful ambition abroad for being genteel. We keep up appearances, too often at the expense of honesty. And, though we may not be rich, yet we must seem to be so. We must be respectable, though only in the meanest sense, in mere vulgar outward show. We have not the courage to go patiently onward in the condition of life in which it has pleased God to call us, but must needs live in some fashionable state to which we ridiculously please to call ourselves, and all to gratify the vanity of that unsubstantial genteel world of which we form a part. There is a constant struggle and pressure for front seats in the social amphitheater, in the midst of which all noble self-denying resolve is trodden down, and many fine natures are inevitably crushed to death. What waste, what misery, what bankruptcy, come from all this ambition to dazzle others with the glare of apparent worldly success, we need not describe. The mischievous results show themselves in 1,000 ways, in the rank frauds committed by men who dare to be dishonest, but do not dare to seem poor. And in the desperate dashes at fortune, in which the pity is not so much for those who fail, as for the hundreds of innocent families who are so often involved in their ruin. The late Sir Charles Napier, in taking leave of his command in India, did a bold and honest thing in publishing his strong protest, embodied in his last general order to the officers of the Indian Army, against the fast life led by so many young officers in that service, involving them in ignominious obligations. Sir Charles strongly urged, in that famous document, what had almost been lost sight of, that honesty is inseparable from the character of a thoroughbred gentleman, and that to drink unpaid for champagne and unpaid for beer, and to ride unpaid for horses, is to be a cheat, and not a gentleman. Men who lived beyond their means and were summoned, often by their own servants, before courts of requests for debts contracted in extravagant living, might be officers by virtue of their commissions, but they were not gentlemen. The habit of being constantly in debt, the commander-in-chief held, made men grow callous to the proper feelings of a gentleman. It was not enough that an officer should be able to fight, that any bulldog could do. But did he hold his word inviolate? Did he pay his debts? These were among the points of honor which, he insisted, illuminated the true gentleman's and soldier's career. As Bayard was of old, so would Sir Charles Napier have all British officers to be. He knew them to be without fear, but he would also have them without reproach. There are, however, many gallant young fellows, both in India and at home, capable of mounting a breach on an emergency amidst belching fire, and of performing the most desperate deeds of valor, who nevertheless cannot or will not exercise the moral courage necessary to enable them to resist a petty temptation presented to their senses. They cannot utter their valiant no, or I can't afford it, to the invitations of pleasure and self-enjoyment. And they are found ready to brave death rather than the ridicule of their companions. The young man, as he passes through life, advances through a long line of tempters ranged on either side of him. And the inevitable effect of yielding, is degradation in a greater or less degree. Contact with them tends insensibly to draw away from him some portion of the divine electric element with which his nature is charged. And his only mode of resisting them is to utter and to act out his no manfully and resolutely. He must decide at once, not waiting to deliberate and balance reasons. For the youth, like the woman who deliberates, is lost. Many deliberate, without deciding. But not to resolve, is to resolve. A perfect knowledge of man is in the prayer, lead us not into temptation. But temptation will come to try the young man's strength. And once yielded to, the power to resist grows weaker and weaker. Yield once, and a portion of virtue has gone. Resist manfully, and the first decision will give strength for life. Repeated, it will become a habit. It is in the outworks of the habits formed in early life that the real strength of the defense must lie. For it has been wisely ordained, that the machinery of moral existence should be carried on principally through the medium of the habits, so as to save the wear and tear of the great principles within. It is good habits, which insinuate themselves into the 1,000 inconsiderable acts of life, that really constitute by far the greater part of man's moral conduct.